I want to start with just speaking to your inner child and saying, welcome. You're welcome here. This is safe. And not only is this safe, this is going to be fun. And if there's any of the inner child in you that feels like, I don't get to have fun, or yeah, right, it's like, I understand, and we'll move through that together. So I just really want to welcome everybody as the adult, but also as all of those parts in you that may not have had the opportunity to be known and felt and experienced. And I just want to invite those parts to feel welcome to do that today. So I have been doing inner child work intentionally for about 5 years. I think I've been doing it unintentionally for about 15. And I think a lot of us here have as well. But the past 2 years, I've had a huge shift. My life has completely turned a corner when I started to focus on my relationship with my mom. I would say actually about 4 years ago when I really started to focus on my relationship with my mom. But the past 2 years was when everything really started to turn a corner, because I went from focusing on my mom to focusing on how I internalized my relationship with my mom, i.e. my inner child, and also what is known as the internalized parent. And we'll be talking about the different parts in just a moment. So you'll hear me talk about some of these parts throughout, and I promise we'll dive deeper into them. But it was really the past 2 years when I had a full evolution of what I thought was my mother, or who I thought was my mother, to realizing that this human life is actually about realizing that the mother that I have always thought was living on the inside of me, that I was actually her, not just the woman who birthed me, but that I could be the adult that I always needed. And that's not to say that my mom was a horrible mom, or that she failed me, or that your parents are that way. No, it's that we are humans. We've all made mistakes, including our parents. And whether it was through miscommunication or actual trauma, there were some things that did not get completed in our childhood. And the good news is that we are here to complete that that's actually our job. And no mom or dad, brother or sister can do that for us. And so we'll talk about that in a little bit. I started meditating when I was 4 years old, which is I learned, very weird thing, not normal. But what was super cool about that was that my grandmother, who was and still is a hippie, had me lay next to her during nap time and said, okay, honey, I'm gonna have you lay down, close your eyes, and walk out of your body. And when you're 4 years old, you just say, okay, grandma. And so that was my first time doing what's known as astral projection. I had no idea that was a thing. I had no idea that was gonna be considered weird to my friends at school. I just knew that it was really fun. The irony of this is that at a very young age, not only did it teach me that there was more to this world than what is on the physical level, but it also taught me how to leave my body, which was at times helpful and at times not so helpful. Can anybody relate to that? Yeah. So a lot of us were actually taught how to eject out of our experiences, how to erase and or pretend like the things that were happening were not happening. And so it's really, now that I've had some more perspective from telling this story, it's really interesting now to be like, yes, I was taught how to meditate at a very young age. And yes, also some of that was a coping mechanism that really needed to be worked out later. So over the years, I moved every year, sometimes as many as 3 times a year. I experienced many, many big T traumas. And big T traumas are things that are what can cause PTSD, which, by the way, that can be anything from divorce to death to illness, someone being imprisoned, abuse of any kind, whether that be something that you have witnessed or something that you experienced. And the list goes on and on, as you can imagine, but there are typically a category of 10 big T traumas that one has the potential to experience in their lives. And by the time I was 16, I experienced 8 out of those 10. And having moved at least once a year, every year, from the age of 4 up until 13, it was a lot. So it's really wild being able to say this now because of the healing process over the years. None of that feels charged anymore. None of that feels even as though that really was my experience, and not because I have ignored it or disconnected from it, but because the pain of it is no longer there. So it's not that I don't sometimes feel the emotion of remembering some of the things that I went through, but it's not something that is untended to. It's all of those big T traumas and the nuance and complexity of them have been really worked with and moved through. And so now that I've gotten to this place in my life, it's really interesting, especially in the past 2 years, to see how this healing journey is not linear, right? So there are still, like I said, just 2 years ago, I was like, great, I've taught all these trainings, I've helped thousands of people heal, I'm good, I'm clear, I did it. And then 2 years ago, I was like, no, you're not. We got some inner child work to do. And so the inner child work that we're going to be talking about today is really like the meat of what was the turning point for me in my inner child and inner psyche work, because I spent many years doing breath work, many years doing things like energy healing and meditation. But it wasn't until I actually started to do this psychological subconscious work of reclaiming these different parts in the way that we're going to do today, did I really have a full integration and really become like a new person. And I was just telling my sister a couple of days ago, sometimes I look at like a video of myself, which I'll have to show you all a video in just a second, but I actually went to a combat wires class, which is like basically, you know, like when you do, welcome, hey John, pull up a seat. You know when you do, like when people do like special effects in like movies and they're like fighting with swords and stuff, I did one of those classes, y'all. And they had me on wires and I was doing backflips on these wires. And let's just say I've never done anything like this before. And when I did the first backflip, I started crying because I was like so happy that I got to do something like this ever. So this is the kind of stuff that happens when we start to heal our inner child. We do things like backflips in gymnastic classes for the first time in our life in our 30s because we're completing those things that we didn't get to before. So this is what I mean about, you know, being like, God, who am I? Because as a child, I never got to do that. But as an adult, I'm getting to do those things like as if I were a child. What a fun revolution of what's possible in life. And I want that for all of us in this room and beyond. So, okay, so that's a little bit about me. I from a healer perspective and from my wellness and spirituality teaching perspective, I've been doing this work for about 10 years professionally since 2012. And the truth is, when I first started guiding and facilitating healing work, I didn't know that you could get paid for it. Jean, you've known me ever since back then. Welcome. Didn't know that you could get paid for stuff like this, right? So it's pretty wild to now be in a world where there are terms like wellness, which, by the way, there was no such thing as wellness 10 years ago, and actually have so many people all over the world feel like, oh, wow, like this is something that I'm interested in. This is cool. I feel like that's because of people like you who have the courage to say, you know what, I'm gonna actually stop being so private about this stuff and I'm gonna live my life this way. This is gonna be my lifestyle. And so this for me as a profession has been 10 years now, which is so wild. And in the process, I've been able to teach energy healing and breath work as for teacher training. We've got some of y'all in the room today who have become certified facilitators in the integrative energy healing practice. But I've also been able to work with thousands of people in a very specific way, which is the integrative energy healing. And I'm saying this because what I realized was happening over the past 5 years is that we were actually doing inner child work without really knowing it. Like I kind of knew it because I knew that that's what I wanted to do. But what we were finding is that people were having complete 360s on their inner child trauma. So talking about some of the most painful human experiences people have had in their lives, they've done the breathwork practice and have completely transformed what that means for their lives. And so very slowly, as that work developed and as it developed in the workshop of working with so many people around the world, which is really important, by the way, because diversity is so important for us to heal together. It is so important for us to see people that look like us, but also people that don't look like us in these healing experiences so that we can see how human we all are, so we can see how we really are all one. And so getting to like experiment this stuff with such a diverse group of people all over the world, I'm like, oh my God, all of this is so natural to you. You don't actually need to be taught. You just need to be guided to remember. That's it. So everything that we're doing today, you already know. You're just gonna remember it again. And the way that I know that to be true is that I've seen people do this practice that we'll be demonstrating today. And it's like this wise elder just comes to the forefront and is like, I know what to do. And you'll see later, I'll be like, oh shit, okay, let's do it. Show us. So that innate wise one that lives within you is what I call the self. And when I say the self, that's the capital S self. Is it this way? Yes. The capital S self. So the capital S self is also known as the highest self, your true self. Some might call that the one. Someone might call that the wise one or the guru that lives within you. Whatever you want to call it. Some might call that the God that lives within you. Whatever you want to name that or whatever makes you feel comfortable, I really don't care. I just know that that's living inside of you. And if you're questioning that, then this is going to be an opportunity to let that part of you come up. So to kind of just transition into the conversation today, I think the true self, the self is a great place to start because when we think about the inner child and we think about inner child work, I find that often we kind of only think about the child that lives within us. So let me just ask y'all, has anybody here ever done inner child work in any way? Can you just raise your hand? Same thing online. Okay, cool, so we got a little mix in the room. Has everybody here heard of the inner child before I mentioned it before? Okay. Did anybody ever think it was cheesy? You can tell me the truth. There we go. Some people tell us the truth. Yeah. I think, especially like in the 90s, there was this huge wave of like the inner child. And then people started making fun of it. Like, ooh, what, is your inner child sad now? There was kind of like this like joke about it. And I think it's finally coming back around again where we're starting to talk about our inner child. We're starting to normalize going to therapy. We're starting to have common language around trauma and PTSD. We're starting to understand that this is something that pretty much everyone has to face at some point in their lives, and that it's not something that we should be keeping in the dark. And so what I find is really interesting about when we do inner child work is that often we kind of think that there is only the inner child. And I want to talk about how the inner child is actually just one aspect of the inner parts that live within your subconscious mind. And before I get into that, I also want to share that when I talk about the parts, what I'm talking about is different aspects of your psyche that believe that they have their own individual identity. You might think about like Beyonce, for example. Everybody has heard of Beyonce and her Sasha Fierce, right? Do we all know about Sasha Fierce? No? Oh. So Beyonce has an alter ego called Sasha Fierce. And when she's going on stage, it is not Beyonce going on stage. It is Sasha Fierce going on stage. And so when you see her in her concerts or in her music videos, she has stepped into her alter ego. And that is a part of her inner psyche. So when I talk about the inner world, we're talking about the subconscious mind, that those aspects of ourselves that we are often asleep to, and the parts of us that we are often awake to. So that part of us that's saying, don't go down that alley, that looks kind of sketchy, right? You can hear that part most of the time. But you might also have another part that says, ugh, you look so ugly today. That's a part of your inner psyche. And that very well might be a different part that says that to you, a different identity, an identity that feels that you should be better, that you should look better, that you should talk better, that you should, right? So that part of you has opinions, but it also has feelings. It also has experiences, and it's doing what it can to live those experiences and those opinions through you. So what's really interesting about this inner parts work, and when we look at the inner psyche, or what I also call the inner realm, is that these parts of us are actually jockeying to be at the front. And what I mean by being at the front is, just imagine if they were on a horse. They want to be the jockey, and they want you to be the horse. So the adult that showed up in this room today or here on Zoom is what we typically call the lead, the part of you that usually is leading things, right? You're the one that put on the clothes today, that bought the ticket to come here, that got you safely into this room or at home. But what happens sometimes is that there are these different parts of you that maybe you're not aware of that are also online, and that will sometimes jockey to the front, who will be at the lead. And often, if it's a subconscious experience, it's not really the best thing to have going on, right? So that's the part of you that when someone says, oh, you look different today, and then all of a sudden, what does that mean, right? There's like this like other part that's like, wait, what does that mean? No, right? It's this like extra like energy that comes on, right? When we take things really, really personally, when we maybe overreact to an experience that doesn't necessarily call for that reaction, that often is that the lead is unconsciously flipped. And when we feel very charged, when we feel very disturbed or anxious or even depressed, it's often that these aspects of ourselves have gone untended to, i.e. they are subconscious and they actually need our help and they actually need healing. And often those parts that maybe want to cut someone off on the road or go bash someone's windows out when they piss you off, right? We all have that. Anybody wants to pretend like they're angels all the time, I know better, right? So that part of you that comes online almost by compulsion, that's actually just an aspect of you. It's not actually who you are. It's a personality that lives within this inner realm. Does that make sense? So to kind of get that idea, then that would mean that that the inner child is actually not the only aspect of you that's operating. So I'm going to just briefly talk about how this starts to happen. When we come into the world as infants, and one of the reasons why we love infants and why babies and children are given so much credit for their innocence and for their bright glow and beauty and light, is because when we come in, every single one of us, we are whole. We are perfect and whole because we are basically this infinite being that has now taken the form of a finite physical body, okay? So when you are fresh out of the womb, one of the metaphors I like to use is like, you're like a brand new iPhone. You're like a brand new iPhone, and I'll tell you why I chose the iPhone. And if you're a Samsung person, don't be mad at me. You're a brand new cell phone, okay? So imagine you just came out of the womb, and imagine that you're an iPhone, okay? You're the brand new one. What is it, a 14? Yeah. Pro Max? That's you, okay? All the data possible. But what's interesting, if you notice, when you get that iPhone, there are actually some preset programs that are already there, right? You put it on, and there's a whole program. It will say hello in like 15 different languages, and then you go through the whole process to set it up, and there's like the calculator's already there, the maps are already there. you're the same way. So while you're whole and complete, just like an iPhone is when you open that box and you get it, you also had some preset programs already in place, and that is your genetics and your DNA, right? So what your parents gave you and what your bloodline has given you. And that bloodline is also a combination of what has happened in the actual family line, like trauma. That's what epigenetics points to now in science. But also even just like belief systems, right? Those preset programs also include some of those cultural beliefs that you get born into. So these ideas of like, oh, so you are a boy or a girl, and this is what being a boy means, and this is what being a girl means. Or now in our culture, oh, actually, now in this culture in America, you don't even have to choose. That's actually a program preset that now kids are being given that is new, right? Cultural influences. It might even be something down to our kids are this political party. Our kids are gonna speak with this accent or this religion, right? So as soon as you come into the world, you have this whole package, but you also came in with these very specific and unique preset programs. And this is the stuff that we are gonna work with today, because a lot of that you are not aware of is still running in the background. And some of it, by the way, because I have to make sure I don't make your family sound like demons, some of it is positive. Some of it is actually really, really beneficial. Some of it is something as simple as a preset that helped you to recognize when something didn't feel safe in the room and to move accordingly, right? Which is really a really important program to have in place. But some of those programs might also be when you are in new places, you believe that you're not safe because it's new and scary, right? So these are belief systems that are downloaded into your subconscious mind from the very beginning, even based off of how you went through the birth canal or not. There's actually some teachers who believe that literally the way that you were born sets the framework for how safe you feel in the world. Is that interesting? So if you ever hear about something like rebirthing, people actually go through a conscious rebirthing process to deal with the trauma of what it was like to be birthed into this room. That's a whole nother workshop. I won't get too deep into that. So when we come into this world, we are whole and complete. But we also come in with these certain presets that are unique and specific to us. And some of those are beneficial, and some of those are actually going to be really challenging for us in our lifetime. And the gift is that from the very moment that we start to break away from this wholeness of being this infinite being, one that always has been and always will be, we begin what is known as the hero's journey. And the hero's journey, if you ever look at like that archetype, is really that first break from innocence. And I want you to just think about for a second, and maybe you can even just feel, because I already have chills just feeling into that, about what that first break of innocence is. And that can be really hard when we really sit with that, right? But the silver lining of that to me is that the good news is that's when your hero's journey began. That's when you had the opportunity to be the hero of your own story. But you have to have that perspective to be able to see your journey in that way. And that's what I hope we can get to today. So we come in as these true selves, whole and complete. And whether it's from the moment that a doctor smacks our butts, which I hope doesn't still happen, does it? Does that still happen? I don't know. That might be the first moment where you're like, damn, this is a violent place, right? Or maybe it was a year later when your mom forgot to feed you for a couple of hours, right? It can be something as traumatic as child abuse at a very young age. And it can also be something as subtle as your mom not looking at you in the way that you felt that you needed when you were just an infant, right? Maybe your mom wasn't as attentive for 5 minutes. That's that first break from innocence. And nobody, no matter how great your parents are, can protect you from that. And the wonderful thing about that is that we are actually supposed to break from innocence. We're supposed to break from innocence and forget where we came from. This infinite realm, whether you call it heaven, the other side, the divine, infinite, whatever, we are actually supposed to forget that so that we can go through a journey of remembering where we came from and where we're returning. And I believe that you don't have to die to remember that or to experience that again, but that actually the opportunity that we have in this lifetime, especially living now where we live, is that we can actually experience that wholeness and that remembrance as a lifelong experience in this lifetime. That we don't have to wait till we go back to where we came from. So we came in, we have this wholeness, something happens where we start to actually forget where we came from, and we start to break away from this oneness. And then we see that in the psyche, in the brain, as we're developing as children, there is a response that happens in the human brain to basically deal with the hardships of being a human. We start to actually break off our psyche and become what's known as a personality. So you can see this in the developmental process of a child, right? If you have a kid or if you know any younger kids, when they start to have these personalities and you're like, oh my God, they don't like what I like. They're like a little bit more picky about this, or they're more quiet than I am, right? We start to see individuality come through. And it can be as young as just a couple weeks old. And so this development process, which is very much human, is also happening in the subconscious psyche, where we are starting to say, I am separate. So that's one of the things that's really interesting about the developmental process, because when a baby is breastfeeding, for example, the baby actually doesn't know that it's not one with its mom, right? And the tension can actually begin when, wait, I can't be on my mom's nipple 24/7. Like I thought that was my body, right? Because just a couple months ago it was. So now there's this realization, even if the brain hasn't been fully developed, which it's not at this point, that's starting to say, I'm separate. So to go from oneness, infinite, wholeness, to I'm separate, we can imagine why babies are crying so much, right? There's pain there. There's confusion there. And there's also a process that's happening where we're starting to actually form our separateness, our identity, our personality. So as we move through the developmental process, we see that these aspects of what we call us, our personality, is based off of those first few formidable years. And some of the things that make you you weren't intentionally put in place, right? So if you, for example, had a parent that was not always available to your needs as an infant, you can imagine how that would start to form maybe a more needy personality type, or depending on the different ingredients put in place, a more independent personality type from the very beginning. So what gets really deep and interesting and nuanced about this is when we start to experience big T trauma, that breaking off of the personality, that breaking off of our individual part starts to happen many times over. So for example, if someone experiences child abuse of any form, in order to deal with that, we often will compartmentalize that experience and make an identity that holds that pain. Does this make sense? So for example, if a child at 2 is physically abused, there is a phenomenon that will happen where without the child even recognizing it, in order to survive, they will create an alter ego that is the bad child, or the child that is laden with that trauma. Does that make sense? Internal family systems, which is a really great framework to look at, and I'd highly recommend you take a look. It's by Richard Schwartz, and it's a really prevalent psychology approach to the inner child. They call this the exile. So this is a type of part that tends to break off from the core psyche or the core ego, or even the oneness, which is the true self. And that will then become its own identity that is not allowed to be felt or accessed easily because there's so much pain that is burdening that persona. Does this make sense? So this is a phenomenon that the human body and the human brain has over millennia learned how to create so that we can compartmentalize and keep going when our environment is not supportive of our holistic well-being. So in so many ways, this is how we survive. But what gets challenging, as you can imagine, is that over time, if you experience enough trauma and enough breaking off, then you become a very scattered, disconnected, and disassociated human being. And that's where we see adults who live with chronic anxiety and depression, suicidal ideation, mental, emotional, and physical illness. It stems from this process because we are compartmentalizing different aspects of ourselves rather than unifying and integrating all these aspects of ourselves to come into healing. And the reason why this happens is because often our parents, our culture, our family does not teach us how to integrate. And a lot of us, like myself, I don't know about y'all, didn't know any of this existed for a very long time. So in the best scenario, in the best possible human experience, you just have an inner child that breaks off from the core self because mom won't breastfeed you anymore. Because mom's like, no, this is my body. You're 2 years old now. You can have a bottle, right? Or you can go and eat real food. Best scenario, that's what's going to happen. You're going to have an inner child that's going to break off and say, I'm separate because, oh, wow, I have my own body and mommy's not going to feed me forever, right? Mommy's body is not my body. But what happens for so many of us is that at the age of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, little things start to break off from that main child self, right? So you've got the true self, that's your wholeness, that's who you came in here to be. Then as you start to realize that you're a human body that has your own separate and unique form and experience, you become the inner child. At that time, you are still a child in your body. So you're just kind of like experiencing full oneness, but also being an independent, unique individual. That's why some kids see spirits, or they are psychic, or are very imaginative because they are still connected to their core infinite self, right? The capital S self. And then as things go along, you might have situations that happen that are not just big teen trauma, but something as small as mom says, you know what, honey, you can't be a singer. You can't be a singer because singers don't make money. So even if you were a kid that loved singing, you might say, oh, I can't be that version of myself. So the singer part gets separated off of you and sent into exile. Does this make sense? Again, I'm just using random examples, right? You all have your own individual experiences with this, but with these examples, you can kind of get a sense of how this stuff starts to go, right? That, again, like I said online a couple weeks ago, it could be even something as small as a misunderstanding. Maybe your mom, to go back to the singing example, maybe you were singing really loud when your mom was on the phone and she's like, babe, stop, be quiet. And in your mind as a 4-year-old, you think, mommy hates my voice, right? I'm not supposed to sing anymore. And that moment could be the turning point as to why that person never sings again. I mean, isn't that just, it's mind-blowing to me. And guess what? If some of y'all are parents, I'm just gonna warn you, there's nothing you can do about this because we're human. And while maybe there were times when our parents could have done better, we would have liked them to have done better. And maybe there were times in some of our cases where our parents were actually harmful and abusive. The truth is that no matter how good a parent is, in the human experience, mistakes will be made and misunderstandings will happen. And so this process of separation will continue until you bring yourself back into wholeness. So here we are, an iPhone or an iPad, and we've got the calculator and we've got the maps thing, and then we start getting new programs. Right? We start getting taught about money. We start getting taught about love and relationships, about worthiness, about creativity. The list goes on and on. All the things that your parents taught you both consciously and unconsciously about what it means for you to be in this world. Not to mention the things that you observed in the world that you weren't even aware that you were learning, right? So one of the things I like to pull out, for example, is like, a lot of parents used to say something like, money doesn't grow on trees, or what do you think I am, rich? You know, when you'd like, be like, Mom, I want new sneakers. You know, those are the kind of things that a lot of us would hear, not realizing that we actually start to internalize those parts of ourselves. So here's the next part. You've got the self, who you came in as, the true self, who you always have been, always will be. You've got the inner child, who can break off into different versions, by the way, right? Who can be the wounded inner child, who could be the radiant inner child. So those could happen in many different iterations. And then you've got this other part that I don't hear taught about a lot, that I'm really excited that y'all came here for, and that is the internalized parent. This is something that I feel like has been left out of this conversation a lot, and we just kind of gave an example of what that looks like. So again, you have repetition that happens as you grow up, right? You learn that this is black, and this is brown, and that's white, right? And over again, your parents will ask you, so what color is this? White. And how many pencils do you have? 3, right? And they're literally indoctrinating you into the culture of the family, into the culture of the community, and so on, which is necessary. But they're also telling you things that are their perspective of what life should be for you that may not be updated, that may have been actually stories or programs that are from their parents that were in the Depression, right? Or their parents who were war refugees, who tell you something I've heard from a lot of my friends who have come from refugee experiences, their parents always kept food on them wherever they went because they literally had to have what they needed on them to survive. And so that gets passed down subconsciously. When you walk out of the house to go to school, your mom might say, don't forget, take a snack with you. You never know when you might need it, right? And you don't even think about it. You're like, oh yeah, you never know when you might need it. But what's under that is fear and trauma about why you might need it, right? And so those things get encoded and those things get repeated over and over and over again so that you have it on the inside of you so that eventually when your parents aren't around, you remember. So you have that parent, the way that you saw them and the way that they were, that combination of what you thought they were and who they actually were, internalized on the inside of your consciousness. So this is known as the internalized parent. Now, some of us didn't have access to both of our parents. Maybe you weren't raised by your mom and dad at all. That would be whoever is that caregiver that represents that caregiver for you, right? That masculine and or feminine, or the lack thereof. So we internalize those parts of ourselves as what's known as the internalized mother and the internalized father. And what's so important about this part of us is that it is often the one that's telling you what to do all day long. I love that you laughed, because it's like, that could get real crazy, right? That can go super off. Yeah. And so you're already releasing. I love it. So the internalized parent is basically the program that is doing the parental dialogue for you. And you often think that's just you. I'm just gonna generally say that. I did. I often thought that was just me. Until I started to get really present, get into deep states where I started to really listen from the higher witness, from the true self, and be like, wait. Who's saying that? And then I would realize, oh my God, that's what my mom would say. Oh my God, that's what my stepdad would say. And so now I'm saying that as if that's what I say, but no, that's the internalized parent. Now again, let me give your parents credit. They also said things like, I love you, you're amazing. Some of you had parents that said, whatever you want to do in life, I support you. And so that is also the other side of this coin. If you had those kinds of parents, or if you didn't have those kinds of parents, but they did have some positive, affirmative things that they programmed into you, that is also useful for you, right? And so for those of us who are given that kind of opportunity in life, you can see why there is a trend statistically that if you were raised in a certain way, your life tends to go that way. You tend to have less trauma repeated. You tend to have better health. I mean, there's actual data that depending on the amount of trauma that you have, remember I talked about the big T trauma, there's about 10 in that big T trauma category. The higher you score on that, the more likely it is that you will have cancer. And that is statistically proven now. Yeah, like I told you, 8 out of 10. So when I started to find that out and see that there was actually a huge correlation to my physical health in my 20s, to those internalized voices that I thought were my own, and I started to actually unravel them, guess what also unraveled? Those health issues. Those health issues started to go away. Those mental health issues started to go away. Those physical ailments started to go away. So the good news is it doesn't mean it's a death sentence for us. But if you don't go back and reclaim these aspects of yourself to make them your own, then you're basically set up to follow the statistics that everybody else is living. And that's not to be scary. I'm not trying to scare any of us. I'm just saying that that's kind of how our world has been set up, right? Because a lot of us don't question where we came from enough to actually unravel and see that that's not who you are. That's who you were created throughout this system of programming to be. And you get to choose who you are. You get to actually make your personality what you want it to be. Your identity gets to be your own. And so this is why I was saying, in this video I was telling you all about on Instagram, I think one of the reasons why that really went off is because I think a lot of us can relate to these inner conflicts that happen in our lives, right? Where maybe, let's say we meet somebody that we really like, but for some reason we're like scared to be around them and we get really anxious when they come around, but we really like them. Guess what that is? 9 times out of 10, I can tell you it's probably either your internalized parent or a wounded inner child. And it's not because that person is weird or threatening, it's because there's an aspect of you that has belief systems about what they represent. Okay, I know that maybe you have some questions. Let's keep some of those questions if you can, write them down, and we'll come back to them if we don't actually answer them in the process. So, internal family systems calls the internalized parent. They don't actually speak of it this way, and I just want to give you kind of the internal family systems framework. It's not something that I've studied directly with them, but from afar. They actually call these voices internally what's known as the protectors. And the protectors have 2 different types under them. One's called the firefighter, and another one is called the manager. And the manager is known as the one who tells you what you should be doing all the damn time. It's basically like your manager, but with a clipboard and a pencil and a pen, and just like, did you do this yet? No, you didn't, you're messing up. All right, well, maybe next time, right? That's the manager. Or, great job, you look amazing today. Keep that up. You know, that's the manager, always trying to make things run smoothly at all costs. Then you've got the firefighter. The firefighter is known as the person, the archetype, the persona on the inside of you who is trying to put out emotional pain. So just imagine your emotional pain, or even physical pain, as a fire. And it's burning, and it's getting hotter and hotter. And it feels like the more that you feel it, the worse it gets because it becomes more intense. So The firefighter is that aspect of you that's like, oh, no, we're not gonna feel this. When we experienced this trauma as a child, that was the only time we're ever gonna feel that again. So guess what? We're gonna drink alcohol to never feel it again, right? So the firefighter comes up with all these very innovative ways to keep us from feeling the heat, to put out and hose down those fires. And something I say to people all the time, and I mean this with all sincerity, when you start to get to know the stories of individuals around the world who have experienced what all of you have, you start to really understand why so many people are alcoholics. And I actually say, you know what? I would be an alcoholic too if I didn't have the tools that I found. There's no question, because you can't survive without having the tools to heal and integrate these things. So you have to push them down so deep that you can't feel them anymore. And one of the ways that we find is the most accessible ways to do that is drugs and alcohol, substance abuse. So the firefighter is really good at that. And frankly, at certain points in your life, that might have been what you needed to survive, truly, right? So the firefighter will work in ways like, hey, let's go drink some alcohol. Hey, let's go do some drugs. Maybe some of you were actually introduced to these things by the firefighter and an adult, right? I know some adults, or some of my clients were introduced to alcohol and drugs by their parents, by their family that was older, that taught them how to use these substances to numb the pain that that adult didn't know how to numb otherwise, right? That also can include addictions like workaholics, right? So learning to work all the time so that you don't feel the feelings when you go home. Has anybody seen Severance? Y'all gotta see Severance, it's amazing. It's a really good show on, is it Apple? Yeah. Such a good show. The whole premise of the show, I'm not gonna give it away, is that when you go to work, there's a little device in your brain that makes you forget everything at home. And then when you go home, there's a device that same device gets shut off, so everything that happened at work, you don't remember. It's so representative of what our culture is like these days, right? So many of us, and honestly, this has been something I've really struggled with because I was taught to be a workaholic. We're taught that we go and get lost in our work because actually that's more honorable than getting lost in an alcohol bottle, right? That also has damage, as you can imagine, maybe to a lesser degree in some circumstances. You were also, in some cases, taught, some of you, to use a different kind of substance, and that is relationships, the high of lust, the high of being in one relationship or from one sexual partner to another. And there's no judgment on any of this. I'm just letting you know that this is what it looks like, right? So some of us are in habitual relationships, not because we actually like the people we're with, but because we don't like ourselves. And so we like to distract ourselves with other people. And when we start to come into recognition of these patterns, we can see that often you were taught this. Someone taught you how to do this, how to deal with life these ways. And so what I say all this to say is that the firefighter and the manager, their job is actually honorable, even the ones that lead you to alcoholism or drug addiction, because they are trying to help you survive the best they know how. So I'm speaking directly to the firefighter, the manager, the protectors that live within all of you. I want you to know that I'm not judging you and that I actually recognize how hard you've worked to make sure that this individual that's in front of me survived up until this point. And speaking directly to you, we are here to do more than survive. We're here to thrive. And so this is the conundrum of the protectors, who tend to be the reflections of our internalized parents. So often what our parents taught us, we then internalize and they become our protectors, whether that be the firefighter or the manager. Does this make sense? They tend to go into those two categories. Those aspects of ourselves, just like our parents, are doing the absolute best they can to help us get by in life. And if you think about the example of an iPad or an iPhone, a lot of those programs are very much out of date. So let's say, for example, if you were 15 and you lived in an abusive household and you found out that your parents had some alcohol in one of the closets and you weren't able to actually leave that household, maybe you were physically abused, sexually abused, whatever. If that is an experience that someone has and they see alcohol and they notice that their dad drinks that and seems to feel a little nicer when he's on it, you might go and do the same thing for the next couple of years. And in that circumstance, and let me just be nuanced with this, in that circumstance, that was the best option you had. Does that make sense? I'm not saying that it wouldn't have been beneficial to get therapy or that you shouldn't have been in that situation that wasn't fair, or that it would have been better for you to get out. But for someone who can't get out, these are the options that you have. You take the best that you have in front of you. And for that short period of time, when you are a young person and not an adult where you can do your own thing, that is the best thing you can do. And so what we see is when we become adults, a lot of those habits don't change. A lot of those programs are held so firmly, so deeply, so tightly that we believe that that's the only way to feel better. And that there is no other option because look at where we came from, right? Does this make sense? Is this resonating, y'all? Does any of this sound familiar? Does any of it sound familiar to you personally? Okay. What about y'all? Yeah? So, having done this work with so many people, I'll just say this. I know that there are people both online and in person who have had real big T trauma. Maybe some of you, many big T traumas, okay? And I wanna also hold space for those of you, whether it's on the recording or here live, who did not have big T trauma. Some of you never had big T trauma, and that is okay. And in fact, I'm so grateful that you didn't, because really none of us should have had that, and none of us deserve that. But if you're one of those people who are like, you know what, looking back, really being able to remember everything, I really don't have any big T trauma, that's totally awesome. And this work is still for you because, as you can imagine, those things that we didn't complete could also look other ways, right? And that splitting off from our wholeness can have other manifestations that can look like someone who did have big T trauma. Some of my clients are like, I never had big T trauma, but I have constant anxiety. And I always say, let's look at that inner child. What's going on there? Because maybe it wasn't because abuse happened, but maybe there was something else that didn't get completed in those developmental stages. Okay, so I want to talk briefly about how the inner child shows up inside of you. So, the inner child that lives inside of you right now is literally a child living inside of you. I don't want you to think of your inner child as like some cute concept. I want you to think about an actual child that's living in your adult body, okay? So the same way that you would speak to a child that comes into this room, that is the same way, ideally, I would like you to talk with and be with the child that lives within you. But here's the thing, often, that's not how we're talking to them. If we even acknowledge them, if they're even allowed to like exist in the space consciously, right? So if you can just imagine that the child that lives within you is an actual real child, then let's just think about what that looks and feels like. That means that that person that lives within you has feelings, has a personality, has opinions, and even has certain tastes, likes and dislikes. I found out doing some guided practices, journaling practices, that my inner child loves pizza and mac and cheese. And let me be clear, she lets me know, not the expensive mac and cheese at a restaurant, no. She wants the cheap, powdery, 99 cents Kroger brand with lots of butter, which, by the way, I don't eat that anymore. But that's what she wants, because that's what made her feel like home. That was the thing that no matter where we moved, she ate that and she felt safe again. So you see, the inner child even has food cravings, has specifics on what colors they like to wear, how they want you to look. My inner child loves when I wear lots of jewelry. This morning, I was like, I think we should tone this down. This is a lot. And she was like, no, I want to wear jewelry because we never got to when we were kids. Now we can't. You see how fun this gets? It can get kind of crazy too, as you can imagine. Crazy. But I just mean that we have these aspects of ourselves that are full-blown personas. And they're actually talking all the time. Now, what can happen, as you can imagine, if they've been exiled into darker, shadowy places within our subconscious mind, they get pushed down into silence and we can't hear them, but they are still there and they are still making sounds. They are still telling you how they feel. They are still feeling the feelings. And when they see things, because they can see through your eyes, when they see things, when they feel things, when they're around unsafe adults, right? Some of us have unsafe coworkers, unsafe partners, people who treat us like crap and we let them. Guess who also is seeing that? Your inner child. So one of the things that I like to think about is if I had a kid, I have a dog named Arya, but if I had a kid, would I just let someone come around and talk to me all kinds of ways in front of my child? No. Well, a lot of times we'll have the excuse, well, I'm at work, so this is my boss, so like I have to. Well, what would you do if a child was there? Would you let your boss speak to you like that in front of your kid? That's what we're doing. It's the same exact thing, right? The flip side of that is when you do great things like, you know what, I'm gonna finally work out and treat my body great. Oh man, your inner child loves that. Because guess what kids love to do? They love to dance, they love to play, they love to make things, they love to do makeup, they love to try on clothes, right? I mean, truly, it doesn't matter what gender you are, by the way. Kids don't give a shit about that. They want to play. They want to take marker to the walls, right? So you can imagine how that's happening all the time. Now, some of us have pushed that little kid so far deep down into our bodies, into our subconscious mind, that they are in cellars. They are in prisons. Sometimes when we do this work, you'll literally see your inner child in a holding cell. But that doesn't mean that that kid doesn't still want those things like any child would, right? Do some of you kind of feel your inner child poking through right now? Can you just, yeah. And some of us who can't, that doesn't mean that they're not there. It's just that sometimes that process has been so stifling for so long that we have disconnected from being able to hear or feel them. So if you can imagine that that's a real person and you can understand, oh my God, just like a real child, they have all these needs, then you can also see how you can feel the inner child in your physical body. So one of the things that I found out over the summer while I was teaching in Spain is that when I get really stressed out, my inner child is actually the one that's getting stressed out in my left shoulder. When I have an inner battle between my internalized mother and my needy, wounded child, all of this starts hurting. So what's really cool about this is that when we start to know this, we can actually access our inner child by paying attention to the physical body, by paying attention to the pain in the physical body, and recognizing that even the physical pain that we feel, like lower back tension, jaw tension, even hand cramps, are actually our inner parts trying to communicate to us. Isn't that cool? I mean, maybe not when you're feeling the pain, but is that an amazing concept? When you realize that maybe the pain that you've been experiencing or even the illness that you've been experiencing could possibly be something yelling out for your help. It's not a punishment, but actually an ally really trying to be heard and seen. So this is something to really get today, because the inner child isn't just speaking, it's feeling. It's felt through your physical body, it's felt through your emotions, and it will also send you images and memories. So depending on what your own personal gifts are or what your preferences are for connecting with your inner parts, you will get either visual or audio cues about what the inner child wants to communicate to you. So inner child, throw one at us right now. You might get a vision of what your inner child looks like. Maybe there's nothing, so you're like, are they even there? Maybe you feel a little tightness in your chest. The inner child will communicate in various ways, but it can look like visions of the future. memories, sometimes painful or sometimes that seem like nothing, like I get a memory of walking past a tree that I used to live by, right? Little things like that. It can also be words or songs. So maybe all of a sudden you hear a song that you used to love on the radio, or maybe a movie will flash in your brain. All of these are cues and communication from the inner child. Does this make sense? Typically, what I find with the internalized parent and the protectors is that the internalized parent, and i.e. at times the protectors who usually take on that role, is that they tend to communicate in opinions. Opinions that could be positive or negative. So it could be things like, I don't think you should go in there because it's dark and scary, which could be a really good opinion. Or it could be that it's like a moody nightclub and it was lit like that on purpose, but it's a totally safe, wonderful place, right? So the opinions can be things like, you need to do better, or you did great today, right? Or it could be, that person is weird, or I really like this person. So a way to kind of get is this my internalized parent, is there's usually an analytical aspect of it, which makes sense. Because, oh wow, did we just, Valin, you're on it over there. Dang, you pulled out, okay, Valin's over there just really giving all this info. I'm gonna have to pull this back out for us, but anyways, coming back. One of the things that's really interesting about, I don't even know what I was just saying, but what was I saying, y'all?
Internalized.
Internalized parent, yes. So one of the things that's really interesting about the internalized parent is that if you think about you as an adult now, they are really the one that's like being strategic, right? They're the one that's thinking ahead. Kids aren't really thinking about anything but what's in the now for the most part, unless they've been taught otherwise, right? Kids are very much in the moment, very much about being in their bodies, seeing what's next. Kids are like, ooh, that's cool. Oh, that's cool, right? So one of the ways that you know that the internalized parent is online is like, oh, we need to do this. Okay, if we do this, then this is gonna happen, right? It's that strategy, which in our culture goes a long ways. I mean, I always say in my trainings, there's a lot of very successful people who've got their internalized parent loud as hell running the show, right? And in some ways that can work, but when we're talking about holistic success in every way, health, prosperity, relationship, everything, spirituality, then that means that analytical side of you cannot be the only part that's running, right? We need to be able to be fully in the moment, and we also need to be able to see things that are potentially in the future, right? So one of the cues for us to know is basically just think about how your parents acted. Think about the patterns that you can recall or that you can still see if they're alive today. Even your closer family, whoever it is that you were mostly around as children, that is very likely how you are talking to yourself. Another little quick thing to note is that the way that your parents treated you is very likely how you treat your inner child today. If you have not gone back to reclaim these aspects of yourself and upgrade those programs and belief systems, then it's very likely that if the wounded child is starting to feel angsty or upset or has something that needs to be seen or dealt with or integrated, however your parents taught you how to deal with things is likely how you were going to teach yourself to do that now. So let me just give you an example to go back to this pain that I have from time to time still in my left shoulder. When I had a major integration with my internalized parent this past summer, it was because I was in a group session with everybody in the room. We were doing breath work. It was a beautiful opportunity for me to be deeply present with what I was experiencing while I was guiding the practice. And I felt this pain in my left shoulder, and I thought, you know what? I'm fully present right now. Let me see what's going on here. So I tuned in, was feeling the pain in my left shoulder, and this is what I heard. Please help me. I feel so much pain right now. Wounded inner child, wounded 5-year-old Milana. I feel so much pain, this hurts. And then I listened. Wow, okay, interesting. I've never noticed that before. Then I heard, shut up, this isn't the time. We're busy right now. Don't you see we're guiding 28 people? Stop thinking about you. We need to be facilitating this breath work. Y'all, this was the first time I realized, oh my God, that's not Milana. That's my internalized parent who's telling a needy child to shut up and don't feel the pain because now's not the time. And if I wasn't in a more witness perspective, viewpoint, because I was very, very present in that moment, I would have thought, that's a really good point. I mean, it's not time for my healing. I'm facilitating. This is my job. But because I was able to see that larger narrative from a different perspective, from the soul self, I was able to see that that was actually really hurtful and mean. And you know what happened within 24 hours? That pain dissolved. And that whole narrative softened, and within a week, I had a full healing of that long pattern of the needy child and the evasive, harsh, critical, internalized mother. You see how that works? You see how subtle that can be? Now, as you can also imagine, there are other times where I feel really successful and I'm like in my flow and I'm like, yeah, I'm doing the thing. And I hear, you're great. You are awesome. You are killing it, right? And I love that internalized parent too. So you get to pick and choose what works for you. Not that I don't need to have some feedback from my internal world, I do. But if I've never been aware, you can see how very quickly over time this compounds. And you can see how the way that you were taught to treat yourself is not just harm or benefit that you can impose on yourself, but also how you show others how they get to treat you as an adult. And that's when things get really real. Because the way that you were taught to treat yourself is how you teach others to treat you. And so now what we start to see, and I'm telling y'all, I've seen this so many times, is a pattern that then reflects the same pattern of our families. It seems really painful at first to recognize that, and this is statistically the case, and I've seen this also in the field, that someone who has experienced child abuse, we tend to see that their children experience child abuse, and then we look back through the ancestry, and there has been child abuse either on one side of the parents or both. That these habits, these unseen tragedies tend to recreate themselves, right? So what we are unaware of and what has gone uncompleted, what has not been brought back into wholeness, we are going to repeat. Let me say that again. What has gone incomplete, we are bound to repeat. That is the nature of human life. And so what's so wonderful is when we do this deep psychological work, where we go into our unconscious mind, we get to smash all that data and it doesn't fall on us, right? All those statistics about if you were abused, then it's likely that that pattern will continue, stops. You see that the old relationships that you used to attract, that guy or gal just is not around anymore. They don't even think you're attractive anymore, right? Has anybody experienced that when you have some healing? When all of a sudden you're like, wait, the assholes don't like me anymore, right? That happens when you change yourself consciously on this level that we're talking about. And then you start to see over time that the same patterns that your family has, your mom, your grandma, your great-grandma, or whatever, you don't have anymore. That's not your story anymore. And this is what we call ancestral healing. Can you think of anything in your life where you can see a pattern that you've broken? Has anybody here broken a pattern in their family? Yeah? It's pretty amazing to be able to look back and be like, wow, I broke these patterns. For those of us who have said, oh shoot, well there's some patterns I've continued, what's beautiful about doing this work is that even those patterns that you feel like you're continuing that feel like not so great, you get to make those useful. You get to recreate those and give them new meaning. And what I was saying to Tim before y'all came is that I don't think I would be able to be in this position to teach if I hadn't suffered so much trauma in my childhood. There's just no, like, how could I have the guts to work on this stuff with people in such a deep way if I hadn't myself gone through it and see how you can have a full revolution of that experience. So even if you feel like there's some patterns that you have right now that you're like, oof, I'm struggling with addiction or I'm struggling with depression and that's a pattern that I've seen, I just want to give you the permission slip to let yourself see that as a gift, that you can make that something that is useful for you. And not just useful for you in this lifetime, but something that will be alchemized into a gift that you can give others, okay? Okay, so we gotta blow through this because we've got our demo coming up soon and we've got at least one, maybe we can get to two. So, just make sure I'm not missing anything here. Okay, so the great news is that we are the hero in our own journey. And when we wake up to the fact that we are the ones that we've been waiting for, we free ourselves from waiting for our parents, our partners, our job, some celebrity, or even death to save us, right? We stop looking out into the world thinking that we'll get what we need from somebody or something else, and we're able to see that actually we are the ones that we've been waiting for. Has anybody ever read The Alchemist? I don't want to give away the ending for those of you who haven't read it, but just know that journey is what we're talking about here today, that we are the ones that we've been looking for, and everything that we thought was out in the world has actually been here the whole time. And so what's really important to remember when we think about things like ancestral healing through doing inner child work including reparenting ourselves, aka reprogramming ourselves, is that we are going to transform, but that does not mean that we are responsible for the transformation of others, namely those who were tied to why we needed to do this transformation in the first place. Okay? So I'm just gonna give y'all a little quick warning. This work is for nobody else but you today. This is not for your mom. This is not for your dad. This is not for your children. This is not for your husband or your wife. This is for you. And the good news about that is that as we change ourselves, as we transform and heal and integrate these parts of ourselves, those who are willing to do the same will meet us there. And those who are not, there is going to be a gap. And that could mean some of your own family and friends. And having done this myself and seeing that very much with my own family and friends, I can tell you that eventually it will trickle down to them, and it will actually give them some support to be able to do this for themselves. It will inspire them, it will help light their path, but that's not why we're doing it. So the warning label is that after today, your relationships are gonna change, which is actually kind of cool, because I know for a fact that there's somebody, at least one person on Zoom or in this room, that has a parent that's not treating them with respect. I'm not gonna look. I know this. And I know that in our culture, and cultures all over the world, there is a lot of fear around dishonoring our parents. There's this idea that if we break from some of this is subconscious, by the way, if we break from some of these patterns, or if we allow ourselves to really look at the harm that we experience as children, that we are being bad children, or that we're being disrespectful to our parents that helped us to actually survive at all. And what I want to just preface this work as we get into the actual experiential aspect of this is not about blame, shame, or guilt. This is about recognition and integration. There's a difference. One of the biggest hindrances to our healing is denial. And what I realized recently, by the way, is in the grief process, which is which is one of the most important aspects of healing, to be able to move through grief, is the recognition of what was actually lost. The recognition of what is no longer available to us so that we can let it go and create space for what actually is available for us. Does this make sense? So for us to go through a grieving process of letting go, AKA to let go, to not hold on to something that is dead and no longer, but to actually let go, to grieve, what we have to be able to do is to actually look at what is in the moment, both what is and what is not. And so denial does not allow you to do that. And I just want to add in here that a lot of us were taught to be in denial to survive. A lot of us had to be in denial because we couldn't leave. But now that we are adults, denial is no longer useful for us. I also, before we go into the practice, want to talk a little bit about this aspect of time. I really believe that time is an illusion, but it's something that we make useful for our human finite lives, right? We are infinite beings who have a finite physical experience. And so sometimes when I hear about inner child work, I hear people say, you're gonna go back in time and go back and get your inner child. You're gonna go back in time and heal those memories. That's not what we're doing here. All time is now. And this will kind of lead to my next point, but I want you to imagine that child who experienced any trauma that you envision being in your past as actually an individual you that is still experiencing it now. We're not going back in time, we're being present with that experience as though it is now, because it is. If you can allow yourself to do that, and I'll talk about how in just a moment, you will be able to literally change your physical body. Because if your mind is thinking it's just this imaginary time, you're not able to actually change how you're experiencing it in the moment. You are experiencing the trauma that you have not let go of, right? And that's why it feels so heavy, because it's literally dead weight. It's not alive anymore, but it is still present. So we're not going to treat the things that happened to you as though they were in the past. We're going to treat them as things that are happening now that you are still carrying. And then we're going to let them go. And then not only is that not your past anymore, but it's not your present either. Does this make sense? So one of the most important undergirding themes under all of this is what I talk about a lot in my trainings, and that is, and in TMI especially, and that is the importance of presence, the power of being in the now. And this is something that I find most of us, including myself, we're never taught how to be in the now. And it's the opposite of denial. Presence is to be fully with what is happening now as it is happening. So that means that presence is a state of being that is fluid. To be present means that you are with the current of life, which is always moving forward. Does this make sense? So when we are deeply present, we are able to hear the sound of that motorcycle as it comes in, but also as it leaves, right? Instead of holding on to the sound of it or trying to make it quiet, like, oh, be more quiet, motorcycle. No, there's the motorcycle, and now it's leaving, right? This is what presence is. I believe that presence comes in layers. Later on this afternoon, we're gonna do a very deep meditation. We're not gonna be doing breath work, but we are gonna be doing a deep meditation that will reflect the demonstration that we'll be doing today. And this will take us through layers of presence. And one of the ways that I find the layers of presence works is that we have these different sensory mechanisms. These sensory mechanisms help us to be more connected to our environment. So for example, the environment includes listening, if you have the ability to hear. It includes visual, if you have the ability to see. But it also is, how does the energy of the room in the moment feel? What are my thoughts? Am I thinking about something else? Or am I listening to what's happening here and I'm fully with it, right? So these are layers of presence, the deeper you go into those layers, think of it like a rabbit hole. The deeper you go into those layers of presence and that stream of what's happening, the more you will experience timelessness. And in this space, this is the fertile ground. This is where healing happens. And you'll see it in just a moment. When we get into this timeless space, everything is now. And not only is everything now, but all of your power, all of your gifts, and all of the things that are in your shadow that seem to negate your power and gifts are now available to be worked with consciously instead of running in the background unconsciously. So presence is only possible through your awareness. And today, we're not just going to be using your awareness to guide us deeper and navigate throughout time and space, but we're going to use what I call, and what many teachers call, loving awareness. Loving awareness is a state, a perspective that is of your higher self, AKA the capital S self. And this self is the part of you, like I said earlier, that has always been, always will be. This part of you has no judgment. This part only loves you. It is curious. It is compassionate. It is open, loving, and only sees you in your highest good. There is never a mistake from this viewpoint. There is never anything that is bad or wrong. Everything is good. In fact, the higher self is like, you don't even have to change if you don't want to. Everything just is. And in that space is love. And I know that can sound a little woo-woo, but we're in LA, so I can talk like that. If we were somewhere else, maybe not, but I know y'all are here, so you get it, you get it.